In the previous video, I talked about the parallels between Walt Disney in the 1970s and Time Warner's DC Comics today. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. You see, back in the 1970s and up to about 1984, 85, Disney was having a bit of an identity crisis. And during this time, they had stopped making your standard princess movies or your, usual funny animal type character movies, and they had gone into a bit of a dark, creating much more darker films. And these darker films, for example, like your Robin Hood, your Pete's Dragon, your Rescuers, and your Black Cauldron, weren't your standard Disney animated fare. The stories, again, were a lot darker. And during this period, they were experimenting with different types of story paradigms, different types of story models, and it was a very, very dark period for Disney. And because they were doing these dark films and they were trying to sell these dark type films to children, the Disney brand started to decline. And what happened was by the mid 1980s, not the mid 1980s, the early 1980s, Disney was in a lot of trouble because a lot of people were not taking their kids to these types of movies. They were getting really turned off. I mean, I remember being a kid back in the day for Fox and the Hound. I went to go see that with my brother and my sister down in Midtown Manhattan. It was a very, very dark movie, a very, very hard movie. And in many ways, it parallels what I see today with the modern DC Comics product. If you look at the DC Comics product today, it follows the exact same pattern in that many of the characters are dark, they're very cynical, they're very angry, and there's a lot of violence, a lot of gore. Now, there wasn't a lot of gore in the Disney movies because it was the 70s, but the tone was very hard, and just like DC Comics today. And because a lot of Disney's product followed this model, again, their sales started to decline. People were getting turned off, and the Disney brand suffered a lot of damage. And that damage was so extensive that it required a complete rebuild of the product. And this is what Michael Eisner had to do when he came into Disney, I think around 1984, 1985. He had to start really beginning the work to rebuild the Disney brand because Disney's brand was pretty much, it was damaged. Nobody wanted to touch a Disney product. Nobody wanted to associate with Disney product. And the house that created, fun little bright characters like Mickey Mouse and fun movies like Sleeping Beauty and Dumbo and 101 Dalmatians, they wanted to get back to that. And Michael Eisner created a plan to get back to that. It was a very slow plan, and it took them several years to rebuild the Disney brand. But by about 1989, when they released Little Mermaid, it was in full swing, and they had started, really rebuilt the blocks towards rebuilding the Disney brand. And this is what I see coming, for the DC Comics brand, during the post Dido era. And I know that there's going to be a post Dido era because pretty much this brand is just as extensively damaged as Disney was back in the 70s. You can't look at DC Comics and say that it's a functioning brand. The brand is pretty much, you know, it's got a negative perception among the public like Disney had in the 70s and the early 80s. People are not enthusiastic about the product anymore. They're not excited anymore. And when they even hear the name Dan Dido, people just get angry and upset. The guy is a lightning rod. He's a complete turn off, and he's pretty much, you know, he's going to have to be excised from the comic book world in order for the healing to begin. And the rebuild, I see for DC Comics is going to have to be something Eisner-esque, where you pretty much take every component of it when you pretty much reboot this entire DC universe and start it completely over. And you have to make it, again, as family friendly and as fun as Disney was when they started rebuilding back in the late 80s when they were doing shows like DuckTales, Chip and Dale, Rescue Rangers, and doing movies like Little Mermaid, The Brave Little Toaster. Now they had one or two dark movies like Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company, but once they got to the Little Mermaid and they started building towards that direction, that was where Disney started to go, and that's when Disney really started to take off because they started doing these family-friendly movies, and they found their niche. And DC Comics is going to have to get back to its niche of family-friendly superheroes if they hope to rebuild the brand, because the brand again has to be completely rebuilt, just like Disney was rebuilt in the late '80s, and you really need a solid executive with a strong vision to do that, because this brand again is extensively damaged. And when people when you're splitting audiences, that's not a good thing. When you look at movies like your Batman v Superman, the audience is completely split. When you look at the New 52, it's completely split. And when you look at Convergence, it's completely split. You don't want a split audience, because that means half of the people who would have gone to see the product to go buy the product are staying home. And you really want a united audience. And this is something that is paramount when you're trying to keep a brand relevant, and also, more importantly, when you're rebuilding a brand, because this brand, when you can't have a split audience, and split audiences, again, you're losing half your revenue, and the DC brand right now is losing half of its revenue. This is why I say that it has to be rebuilt, and it has to be completely reconstructed with a brand new DC universe. And with a brand new DC universe, I see a lot of opportunities, because I see a lot of great artists out here who are showing that they can take fresh takes on existing characters and existing characters in the catalog, and even classic stories. When I look at the art of a Bill Walko or a Josh Howard or many other comic artists, out here, they show that they can take and put a fresh take on these characters and make them relevant for the 21st century. And the DC superheroes, I see a lot of potential in them. I see them being able to overcome this dark period, just like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and Chip and Dale and all these other great Disney characters, have managed to survive that dark period of the 1970s and the 1980s. They managed to survive that period, and they managed to adapt. And I see the DC brand being able to survive and adapt. But it takes, a new era to start, and that's going to take almost, again, a Michael Eisner type person with that type of vision and that type of imagination to begin the work of rebuilding this DC Comics brand, so that it can have that enthusiasm and excitement. Because once Eisner started to rebuild Disney, they began to shake off all the darkness of the 80s and all the grim and gritty and the anger. They shook all that off, and people became, again, enthusiastic about going to see Disney movies. People were excited to see Little Mermaid. They were excited to see Aladdin. They were excited to see Lion King. There was incredible buzz for these type of for Disney's animated movies, and even other films from its divisions like Touchstone, which made Pretty Woman and made Julia Roberts a star. And when because Disney, they did a complete rebuild, and they by the time the mid '90s came around, Disney was so strong they were able to buy ABC, and that's all from the vision of Michael Eisner. Having the vision and imagination to say, look, this is where we need to go. This is what direction we need to go in, and what we're doing right now isn't working. We need to try to do something else. And now these days, when you think of Disney, you think of fun, you think of excitement, you think of all sorts of unique movies like Pixar, and you think of a whole new generation of characters. And all that came because people executives at Disney decided, what we're doing isn't working, and we need to go in a different direction. And this is what Warner Brothers executives pretty much are going to have to do, realize that 15 years with Dan Dido is long enough. A decade and a half of dysfunction is long enough. And it's time to take DC's 3,000 plus characters in a direction that allows them to reach a new generation of readers and relate to a new generation of readers, telling their classic tales of right and wrong, being this fun, happy place that the DC universe was all throughout the 90s in all those classic Bruce Timm cartoons, with Paul Dini Bruce Timm cartoons, and giving kids that type of superhero experience. That's going to have to be what DC is going to have to stand for. And we have to get back to that, because I see a PG or PG-13 DC, and I see that reaching a new generation of readers. I see DC taking itself to the next level, but again, it all takes the removal of this Dan Dido and all the negative energy he radiates, and the whole negative vibe that the DC product currently has. I mean, it's going to take a complete excise of this cancer from the DC brand so that it can start the healing, and bringing all these DC fragmented DC fans together, all the fragmented DC readers together, and bring this product back to being family oriented, family friendly product it has been for the last, I say, about 60 years. And when that product was like that, it brought families together. It made people friends, and it really gave people some heroes that they could relate to and identify with, and heroes people cared about just like their own friends and family. We need to get back to that type of DC, and I see that if I were running DC, that would be the type of DC I would be trying to rebuild, because that's the direction I see the product should be going in. And it should be easy to follow, easy to understand, and a product that's accessible from anybody from 8 years old to 80 years old, and heroes that grandparents, parents, and children can share with each other. That's what I really want to see, brought back to comics, and that's what I would like to see as part of a rebuilt DC Comics brand.